Picture yourself standing at the edge of a vast quarry, gazing up at a massive obelisk still attached to the living rock, a project abandoned mid-creation, frozen in time for thousands of years. The tools are still there, the worker markings visible, the ambition palpable, yet something stopped everything in its tracks. What happened here? Was it a crack in the stone, a sudden invasion, a shift in power, or something even more mysterious? These unfinished monuments are far more than just abandoned construction sites. They are silent storytellers, holding within their stone the dreams, the technologies, and the unexpected interruptions of civilizations long gone. When we look at history, we often focus on what was completed: the pyramids, the temples, the palaces, but it's in these incomplete projects that we find the most honest and revealing glimpses into the past. Unlike ruins that slowly crumbled over time, unfinished monuments capture a single moment, like a snapshot. The chisel left mid-strike, the foundation laid but never built upon, the grand vision interrupted. They show us not only what ancient societies were capable of, but also what stopped them in their tracks, whether it was natural disaster, economic collapse, war, or simply a change of heart. In their incompleteness, they become perfect time capsules, preserving the methods, the mindsets, and the vulnerabilities of their creators. In this video, we're going to explore some of history's most fascinating unfinished monuments, from the colossal obelisk in Aswan to the staggering megaliths of Baalbek, from the ambitious stupas of Burma to the interrupted pyramids of Egypt. Together, we'll decode what these fragments can tell us about lost eras, and we'll venture into the compelling theories about why they were left behind. This is a journey into the unknown, a chance to walk alongside archaeologists and historians as they piece together clues from stone, and to reflect on what these ancient half-finished dreams say about us and about the timeless dance between human ambition and the forces beyond our control. So settle in, we're about to dive deep into the mysteries of the unfinished, and you might just come away seeing history in a whole new light. There's a profound and almost universal magnetism to things left incomplete. A finished building tells a single, definitive story, but a monument frozen mid-creation tells 1,000 possibilities. It exists in a state of permanent potential, a what-if carved in stone that tugs at our innate curiosity. This isn't just about ancient history. We feel it when we see a modern housing development halted by a financial crash, or a forgotten shopping mall being slowly reclaimed by nature. These places become canvases for our imagination. We look at the rough-hewn blocks of an abandoned temple, and we can't help but wonder, who were the people working here? What did they hope to achieve? What incredible event or sudden decision made them simply drop their tools and walk away? That act of wondering, of mentally reconstructing a lost moment, is a powerful form of connection across centuries. This allure is deeply rooted in both emotion and intellect. On one hand, these sites evoke a poignant sense of melancholy, a recognition of ambition cut short and effort ultimately wasted. They are stark reminders of the fragility of even the most powerful empires and the unpredictability of life itself. This melancholic beauty has inspired poets and artists for generations, from the romantic painters who marveled at ivy-covered ruins to contemporary photographers who find stark beauty in concrete skeletons of failed modern projects. Yet, on the other hand, they spark a thrilling intellectual curiosity. They are real-world puzzles waiting to be solved. As historian Dr. Elena Torres suggests, they function as open-ended narratives. A completed monument story is largely set, but an unfinished one is endlessly reinterpretable. Each new generation of archaeologists, armed with new technologies and new historical perspectives, can ask different questions of the same stones, drawing out new clues about the past. This unique combination, emotional resonance and intellectual mystery, transforms these fragments from mere rubble into something far more significant. They become symbols. They represent the breathtaking heights of human ambition, our drive to create, to build, to leave a mark that echoes through time. But simultaneously, they humbly illustrate our limits, showing how we are ultimately vulnerable to forces beyond our control, be they natural disasters, war, economic collapse, or simply the passage of time. They don't just show us what a civilization built, they show us what it dreamed of building, and in that gap between dream and reality, we find a deeply human story. This powerful duality is why we are so captivated, and it's precisely what makes these sites such invaluable portals, offering us a raw and unfiltered glimpse into worlds we thought were lost forever. But to truly understand the power of these silent storytellers, we first have to know exactly what we're looking at. It's a common misconception that every ancient ruin we see was once a complete and functioning structure that simply succumbed to time. The truth is far more interesting. There's a critical and often overlooked difference between a monument that was finished and then later fell into decay, and one that was deliberately abandoned mid-creation, left exactly as it was the day the workers walked away. Think of it like this: the Roman Colosseum is a ruin. It was completed, hosted glorious games for centuries, and then slowly deteriorated due to earthquakes, stone robbing, and the passage of time. Its story is one of use and then decline. Now contrast that with the unfinished obelisk in Aswan, which we just glimpsed. It was never freed from its quarry bed. The tool marks of the workers are still fresh on the stone. The wooden wedges they used to split the granite might have rotted away, but the evidence of their technique is perfectly preserved. This site isn't a story of decline, it's a story of sudden interruption. It's a moment frozen forever, like pressing pause on a movie at the most dramatic scene. These intentionally halted projects are the true time capsules. They were stopped in their tracks by specific, often dramatic, historical events. A pharaoh's unexpected death that threw a dynasty into chaos, an invading army that redirected all resources to defense, a catastrophic earthquake that buried a city overnight, or a radical religious reform that rendered a half-built temple obsolete. This precise moment of abandonment is what makes them so invaluable to archaeologists. A completed building shows you the final product, but an unfinished one shows you the entire process. It's the difference between seeing a beautifully baked cake and being able to watch a video of every single step of the recipe, from mixing the batter to setting the oven temperature. These sites preserve a snapshot of the technology, labor organization, and daily priorities of a civilization at a specific point in time. In the quarries of Egypt, we can see exactly how obelisks were extracted, the types of tools used, and even the order of operations. At a half-built medieval cathedral, we can study the original crane systems, the stonemasons' templates, and the construction sequencing that would be hidden beneath plaster and decoration in a finished building. This distinction allows historians to move beyond guessing and to understand the how with incredible clarity. By recognizing an unfinished monument for what it is, a project abruptly halted, we gain a privileged window into the ambitions, the methods, and the vulnerabilities of a lost world, appreciating that its historical value lies not in grandeur, but in its raw, interrupted state. Now, let's turn our attention to one of the most iconic and physically staggering examples of an interrupted dream, the unfinished obelisk of Aswan. Nestled in the ancient granite quarries of southern Egypt, this colossal stone needle remains forever attached to the bedrock it was being carved from. If successfully extracted and erected, it would have towered over 40 meters high and weighed an almost unimaginable 1,200 tons, dwarfing every other obelisk ever created by the ancient Egyptians. Its sheer scale was a statement of ultimate power and divine connection, intended to glorify a pharaoh and stand for eternity, but it never left its birthplace. The most immediate and visible reason for its abandonment is right there in the stone. During the extraction process, a devastating crack appeared in the granite. For the master builders, this flaw was a death sentence for the project. A fractured obelisk would be structurally weak, likely to snap during the incredibly dangerous process of raising it. The immense investment of time, labor, and resources, which would have been staggering even for a smaller obelisk, could not be risked on a compromised monument. This practical explanation makes perfect sense. Yet, in the world of Egyptology, things are rarely so simple. The timing of this project is crucial, with many scholars linking it to the reign of the female pharaoh Hatshepsut in the 15th century BC. Her rule was one of immense prosperity and ambitious building projects, but it was also politically complex, as she was co-ruler and later successor to Thutmose III, who might have had his own opinions on her legacy. Some theorists propose that the crack in the stone might have been a convenient excuse to halt a project intended for a controversial ruler, especially if political winds shifted after her death. Alternatively, a change in religious focus or royal priority could have simply redirected the workforce and materials to another, more pressing site, leaving the obelisk to the elements. What makes the Aswan quarry truly extraordinary, beyond the mystery of its abandonment, is the unparalleled window it provides into ancient Egyptian engineering. This isn't a ruin, it's a frozen workshop. The entire site is an open-air museum of stoneworking technology. You can clearly see the channels carved around the obelisk, and within those channels, the precise marks left by the workers' tools. We know exactly how they did it. Teams of laborers would have pounded the hard granite not with iron chisels, but with hand-sized balls of an even harder stone called dolerite. They would methodically pound a trench along the intended line, eventually working their way down to separate the obelisk from the bedrock below. We can still see the spaces where wooden wedges would have been inserted and soaked with water to expand and make final cracks. We see the ramps and pathways that would have been used to drag this titanic object out of the quarry. The site even preserves the remains of ancient worker huts and simple graffiti, offering a fleeting human connection to the individuals who dedicated their lives to this backbreaking labor. The unfinished obelisk, therefore, stands as a powerful dual symbol. It is a breathtaking testament to the audacious ambition of the ancient Egyptian state, capable of envisioning and attempting to execute a project of literally monumental proportions. But simultaneously, it is a humbling reminder of their very human limitations. It shows that even with their sophisticated knowledge, their immense organizational power, and their divine mandate, they were still vulnerable to the unpredictable. A hidden flaw in the stone, a shift in political power, a change in the royal will, any of these could bring the most magnificent project to a sudden and permanent halt. This single fragment of stone tells a more complete and honest story than a dozen finished obelisks ever could, illustrating the fragile line between immortal ambition and earthly reality. But if the unfinished obelisk represents a project halted before it even began, the next site on our journey presents a mystery of an entirely different magnitude. In the fertile Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, the ruins of the Roman temple complex of Baalbek stand as a testament to imperial grandeur. Yet, it is not the soaring columns of the Temple of Jupiter that pose the greatest enigma. but rather the gargantuan foundation upon which it all rests. Here, in a quarry just a short distance from the main complex, lies the stone of the pregnant woman, a single, unfinished block of limestone that weighs an almost incomprehensible 1,000 tons. Nearby, embedded in the terrace wall of the temple itself, are two other blocks of similar size, perfectly positioned. We are left staring at a fundamental question. In a world without powered machinery, how did ancient builders even conceive of moving such monstrous weights, and what chain of events led them to leave one of these giants stranded in its birthplace? The scale is simply baffling. To put it in perspective, that 1,000-ton block is heavier than a fully loaded Boeing 747 airplane. The two blocks already in place within the wall, known as the trilithon, are each estimated to weigh around 800 tons. The Romans were master engineers, renowned for their roads and aqueducts, but this feat seems to push the boundaries of plausibility. The standard explanation involves an immense workforce, a forest of ropes, and a sophisticated system of wooden rollers and capstans. But even with thousands of men, the logistics of coordinating a pull on a single 1,000-ton object without it sinking into the ground or the ropes snapping stretches the imagination. Some researchers have proposed alternative methods, such as a massive counterweight-powered lever system or even the use of advanced Roman cranes, though the sheer mass involved makes most traditional lifting techniques seem inadequate. The precision with which these blocks were cut and fitted is another layer of the puzzle. Their edges are sharp, their faces remarkably smooth, and they are joined together with an accuracy that would be challenging even with modern tools. This level of craftsmanship on such an immense scale suggests a degree of planning and skill that feels, to many, almost anachronistic. This has, of course, fueled more speculative theories. The local name for the site, Balbeck, derives from the Canaanite god Baal, and the temple complex was built upon even older foundations, some believed to date back to the Phoenicians or earlier. This has led to conjectures that the massive foundation platform, including the gigantic stones, could be the work of a much older, perhaps even lost, civilization possessing knowledge or technologies that history has forgotten. Others suggest a more symbolic reason for the megaliths, that their immense size was never purely practical, but was intended to inspire awe and fear, to literally ground the temple in a display of power so overwhelming it would feel divinely ordained to any visitor. The Romans were certainly masters of propaganda in stone, so why was the stone of the pregnant woman abandoned? The most likely reasons are grounded in the harsh realities of the ancient world. The quarry shows evidence that the block may have cracked during extraction, just like the obelisk in Aswan, rendering it useless for its intended purpose. Alternatively, the immense logistical challenge of moving it might have finally been deemed too great, a drain on resources and manpower that could be better spent elsewhere. Historical records point to periods of political instability and relentless military campaigns across the Roman Empire. It is entirely possible that the legions or the skilled engineers stationed at Baalbek were suddenly redeployed to a restive frontier, leaving the project in the hands of a skeleton crew unable to continue the most ambitious work. The block was simply too big to fail quietly. Its abandonment is a silent, stubborn monument to a limit that even the mighty Romans could not overcome. While the mysteries of Egypt and Rome speak of ancient worlds, our next story unfolds in a more recent era, yet it is no less epic in its ambition or poignant in its failure. In the small town of Mingun, just north of Mandalay in Myanmar, rests one of the most visually arresting and philosophically profound unfinished monuments on Earth, the Mingun Pahtodawgyi. This is not a tale of a crack in stone or an invading army, but a story of one man's divine ambition crashing against the unyielding walls of economic reality and human fear. Commissioned in 1790 by King Balbeck of the Konbong dynasty, the vision was breathtakingly simple and staggeringly grand: to build the largest Buddhist stupa the world had ever seen. The planned structure was meant to reach a height of 150 meters, a literal mountain of brick and mortar that would have utterly dwarfed every other religious monument in the region, a permanent, undeniable testament to the king's power and piety. For over 2 decades, thousands of workers toiled under the scorching Burmese sun. An entire economy was bent toward this single goal. Bricks were produced in massive kilns, elephants and barges transported materials, and a special tax was even levied on the population to fund the construction. The base of the stupa alone is a monstrous square, each side stretching nearly 70 meters, and what stands today, a solid brick mass reaching about 50 meters, is less than a third of the intended height, yet it remains an awe-inspiring sight. But then, in 1819, the work stopped, the king died, and with his passing, the driving force behind this colossal endeavor vanished. The royal court, faced with the immense ongoing cost and the exhaustion of the kingdom's resources, made the pragmatic decision to abandon the project. The economic strain was simply too great. The dream had become a bottomless pit consuming the nation's wealth. Yet there is another, more haunting layer to this story, one that speaks to the powerful intersection of spirituality and superstition. A prophecy had long circulated that the kingdom would fall once the great stupa was completed. This was not merely a folk tale, it was a deeply held belief that undoubtedly influenced the court's decision. The immense structure, therefore, stands as a powerful symbol of a dilemma faced by many ambitious rulers: the push and pull between the desire for an immortal legacy and the practical, often fearful, concerns about maintaining power in the mortal realm. It is a literal monument to hubris, but also to the very human anxieties that ultimately limit even the most absolute power. The passage of time has added its own dramatic commentary to the site. A massive earthquake in 1838 tore deep, jagged cracks into the brickwork, giving the stupa the appearance of a great mountain that had been split asunder by the gods themselves. These scars do not diminish the site, instead they amplify its meaning. They symbolize the fragility of human endeavors against the immense forces of nature and time. Today, the Mingun Pahtodawgyi is not a forgotten ruin. It is an active pilgrimage site, but its power lies in its incompleteness. Buddhists who visit contemplate not a perfect achievement, but a profound lesson in impermanence and the futility of attachment to worldly projects, even those undertaken in the name of the divine. It is a ruin that teaches by its failure, a majestic, broken dream that reminds every visitor of the delicate balance between our highest aspirations and the earthly realities that inevitably ground them. While the grand stupa of Mingun reflects a slow economic and prophetic decline, the story of Pharaoh Neferefer's pyramid in ancient Egypt is one of breathtakingly sudden interruption. This isn't a tale of a project gradually winding down. It's a snapshot of a dynasty thrown into immediate crisis. Neferefer, a ruler of Egypt's 5th dynasty around 2400 BC, ascended to the throne as a young man, full of the divine mandate to begin his eternal home, a pyramid complex that would serve as his gateway to the afterlife and a testament to his power on earth. The construction would have begun almost immediately, a frantic race against the pharaoh's own mortality to create a monument that would last for eternity. But fate had other plans. Historical evidence suggests Neferefer's reign was shockingly brief, perhaps lasting only 2 or 3 years before his unexpected death. The site at Abusia, his chosen necropolis, tells the entire tragic story in layers of stone and ambition. Instead of the smooth, imposing geometric form we associate with Egyptian pyramids, Neferefer's monument is a stark, truncated structure. The builders had only managed to complete the lowest core layers of the pyramid, creating a square, flat-topped massif that more closely resembles a large mastaba tomb than a true pyramid. The construction was abruptly halted the moment the pharaoh died, and the priorities of the state instantly shifted. There was no time to finish the grand vision. The most pressing concern for his successor, likely his brother Shepsesker, was not architectural glory, but religious and political necessity. The pharaoh had to be buried according to sacred ritual to ensure the stability of the cosmos and the continuity of the dynasty. This urgency led to a remarkable improvisation. The builders quickly converted the unfinished pyramid's core into a makeshift, but functional, tomb. They added a simple limestone mortuary temple directly against its eastern face, a structure that was functional and ritually adequate, but far from the grand complex originally planned. Within this hastily arranged sanctuary, priests could perform the essential daily offerings for the pharaoh's spirit. Neferefer was buried not in a polished subterranean chamber beneath a mountain of stone, but within the rough, unfinished core of his own aspirations. This pragmatic solution offers archaeologists a rare gift. Because the construction process was frozen so early, we can see the raw methodology of pyramid building with unparalleled clarity. The arrangement of the core blocks, the layout of the initial courses, the logistics of the ramp systems, all without the finished exterior that typically obscures these crucial details. But the clues from Neferefer's tomb extend far beyond construction techniques. The very fact that such a rushed and compromised burial was deemed acceptable for a god-king speaks volumes about the political instability of the Fifth Dynasty. A strong, stable succession would have likely seen the next pharaoh complete his brother's pyramid as an act of piety and legitimization. The decision to simply adapt it suggests a period of potential turmoil, a possible power struggle, or simply a lack of resources to commit to a dead king's project when a new one needed to be started. The unfinished pyramid thus becomes a silent witness to a vulnerable moment in Egyptian history, a poignant reminder that even a society so obsessed with eternity and order could be thrown into disarray by the simple, unpredictable mortality of its divine ruler. His story forces us to remember that behind these vast stone projects were fragile human lives, and a single death could alter the course of architectural history. Moving from the sudden demise of an Egyptian pharaoh, we journey now to the windswept plains of ancient Mesopotamia, where the story of a different kind of collapse is etched into the sun-baked bricks of the Zigorate of Jore-Kurigalzu. Located in what is now Iraq, this massive step temple tower was the spiritual and administrative heart of a city built by the Kassites, a people who rose from the Zagros Mountains to rule Babylon for an astonishing 4 centuries. Their reign was one of the longest and most stable in Mesopotamian history, a period of cultural consolidation and international diplomacy. The Zigorate at Jore-Kurigalzu, dedicated to the patron god Enlil, was meant to be a permanent declaration of that power, a man-made mountain reaching for the heavens to proclaim the Kassites' rightful place among the great empires of the Bronze Age. Yet its summit was never crowned. Unlike the clean, geometric lines of a finished ziggurat, the structure at Jore-Kurigalzu reveals its raw, internal anatomy. This unfinished state is an archaeologist's dream, a perfect cross-section of ancient ambition. We can see the entire construction process frozen in time. The core of the tower is a gigantic mass of sun-dried mud bricks, a rough and quickly assembled form that provided the structural bulk. The intention was always to encase this humble core in a beautiful, protective skin of kiln-fired bricks, which would have been glazed or perhaps even painted to gleam brilliantly under the Mesopotamian sun. This 2-stage construction method was standard, but here the process was arrested. The baked brick facing was only partially applied, leaving the vulnerable mud brick core exposed to the elements. This tells us that the project wasn't just low on a priority list, it was actively abandoned. The workers downed tools and never returned, leaving their divine task incomplete. The reasons for this abandonment point to a slow, grinding decline rather than a single catastrophic event. By the twilight of the Kassite period, around the 12th century BC, the entire Eastern Mediterranean and Near Eastern world was entering a period of profound crisis now known as the Late Bronze Age collapse. A perfect storm of pressures was building. Waves of mysterious marauders, often called the Sea Peoples by Egyptian records, were destabilizing coastlines and trade routes. More pressingly for the land-locked Kassites, new and powerful forces were rising on their borders, particularly the expansionist Middle Assyrian Empire under a series of ruthless kings. These Assyrian armies were a relentless, ironclad war machine, and they began to chip away at Kassite territory, sacking cities and plundering resources. It is highly likely that the skilled laborers and vast quantities of fuel needed to fire the thousands of bricks for the ziggorat were desperately redirected to more immediate concerns: forging weapons, strengthening city walls, and supplying armies. The dream of reaching the gods was sacrificed to the desperate need for earthly survival. The abandonment of Jore-Kurigalzu is therefore a powerful, silent metaphor for the entire Kassite experience. They were not instantly wiped out by a single invasion, but rather gradually worn down. Their economic and military resources stretched to a breaking point until the grand projects that defined their civilization became unsustainable. The unfinished ziggorat stands as a monument to this fading glory. It is a testament to what they almost achieved, even as their power was slipping through their fingers. It reminds us that empires are not always toppled in a single dramatic battle. Sometimes they simply exhaust themselves, their grandest visions left as skeletal reminders in the desert, outliving their creators not as symbols of triumph, but as echoes of ambition curtailed by the inexorable tides of history and conflict. While human ambition has often been the driving force behind history's grandest projects, the raw, untamable power of nature has frequently been the hand that brings them to a sudden, decisive stop. Across continents and millennia, natural disasters have acted as the ultimate circuit breaker for civilizations, freezing construction sites in a state of suspended animation and offering us some of the most poignant and precise snapshots of the ancient past. Unlike abandonment due to economic or political shifts, a disaster-induced halt is immediate and absolute, preserving a moment of everyday life with heartbreaking clarity. The most famous example of this is the ancient Minoan settlement of Akrotiri on the island of Santorini. Around the year 1600 BC, the volcano at the heart of the island erupted with a cataclysmic force that dwarfed even the famous eruption of Mount Vesuvius that would later bury Pompeii. But unlike Pompeii, which was hit by a fast-moving pyroclastic surge, Akrotiri was first blanketed by a thick layer of light pumice stone. This initial fall gave the residents crucial warning, allowing them to evacuate the town and saving countless lives, as no skeletons have been found in the ruins. What they left behind, however, is a perfectly preserved Bronze Age time capsule. Archaeologists have uncovered entire buildings frozen mid-renovation, with jars of paint and plaster left beside unfinished frescoes. Ladders were left leaning against walls, pottery was stored in cupboards, a loom still held its thread. The town was a living, breathing community one day, and a perfectly sealed archaeological site the next, its vibrant life interrupted not by human conflict or failing resources, but by the awesome and indifferent power of geology. It is this very immediacy that makes disaster sites so invaluable to researchers. They provide an unparalleled stop clock on history. When geologists and archaeologists work together, they can pinpoint the exact year and sometimes even the season of a disaster. At Akrotiri, the layers of volcanic ash and debris act like the pages of a calendar. By analyzing the chemical composition of the ash and the direction of the fall, scientists can reconstruct the eruption sequence. Furthermore, they can find organic material like a charred piece of wood from a furniture maker's workshop or seeds from that season's harvest, and use radiocarbon dating to anchor the event in a precise historical timeline. This collaboration between disciplines turns a tragic event into a crucial historical marker, helping to synchronize the timelines of neighboring civilizations like Egypt and Mesopotamia, who would have recorded the atmospheric effects of such a massive eruption. Beyond volcanoes, other natural forces have left their unmistakable mark on unfinished monuments. Earthquakes have toppled partially erected columns in Greek temples, leaving them in a chaotic jumble that reveals exactly how the stones were being set. In parts of the Indus Valley, evidence suggests that massive, civilization-altering floods may have suddenly halted urban development, forcing a complete and abrupt change in settlement patterns. Each of these events, while devastating, creates a unique archaeological signature. They don't just tell us that work stopped, they show us how it stopped in a frantic rush, an orderly evacuation, or an instantaneous cataclysm. This provides deep insight into how ancient people responded to crisis, what they valued enough to try to save, and what they were forced to leave behind. These silent stones tell a story of human resilience in the face of overwhelming natural power, reminding us that our plans have always been subject to the shifting ground beneath our feet and the volatile skies above. If the unstoppable force of nature can halt a civilization's dreams, the calculated violence of human conflict can shatter them just as completely. Throughout history, war has acted as the ultimate arbiter of ambition, freezing monumental projects in time and transforming building sites into stark symbols of conquest and cultural rupture. Unlike a natural disaster, which is an indiscriminate act of geology, the abandonment caused by invasion is intensely human, a deliberate act of redirecting a society's energy, labor, and wealth from creation to destruction, or from spiritual pursuit to sheer survival. When an army appears on the horizon, the stones meant for a temple are suddenly needed for a fortification. The artisans carving intricate reliefs are conscripted to forge swords, and the grand vision of a king is instantly replaced by the desperate need to defend his kingdom. The Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire in the 16th century provides one of the most dramatic and tragic examples of this phenomenon. The Inca were master stoneworkers, and their architectural projects, like the immense fortress complex of Sacsayhuaman overlooking Cusco, were feats of engineering and communal effort. The site's famous zigzagging walls, composed of colossal, perfectly fitted stones, were a testament to their power and a key part of their ceremonial and military landscape. But when Francisco Pizarro and his conquistadors arrived, everything changed. The carefully organized labor system, the MITA, which had once directed thousands of workers to extract and transport these gigantic blocks, was immediately dismantled and repurposed by the Spanish for mining silver and gold. The skilled stonemasons were likely killed in the fighting, died from European diseases, or were forced into new forms of servitude. Construction at Sacsayhuaman and countless other sites across the Andes simply stopped. The stones that were meant to be lifted into place remained on the ground, and the complex itself became a battleground during the Inca Rebellion of 1536, its unfinished sections bearing silent witness to the violence that had interrupted its creation. These sites, frozen by conflict, often take on a powerful second life as symbols. For the conquerors, an unfinished native monument might represent their superior power, a tangible sign that their gods and their technology had triumphed. But for the conquered and their descendants, these places become potent symbols of resistance, cultural loss, and resilience. They are physical proof of a world that was abruptly taken away, embodying the trauma of conquest while also silently asserting the enduring presence of the culture that once flourished there. Historians carefully study these interruptions in the archaeological record, a layer of ash from a burned city, a cache of tools hastily buried, a shift in construction materials from fine-cut stone to rough rubble, to map the precise spread of empires and understand how local traditions persisted, adapted, or were tragically erased under new regimes. This intimate link between architecture and power has played out across the globe and throughout time. In ancient Mesopotamia, the invasion of one city-state by another would often result in the deliberate halting of a rival's temple construction, a symbolic act of subjugation. During the French Revolution, many church-building projects were abandoned not due to a lack of faith, but because the very institution that commissioned them was under attack, and resources were funneled into the Revolutionary Wars. Each conflict-ridden site tells a dual story. It reveals the soaring ambitions of its original builders and the brutal reality of the force that stopped them. They stand as permanent reminders that the course of history and the skyline of our world has often been decided not by the artist's chisel, but by the soldier's sword, leaving behind fragments that speak as much of power lost as of palaces never built. While war and disaster can strike with sudden, brutal force, the slow, grinding pressure of economic collapse can be just as effective at halting humanity's grandest dreams, quietly starving a project of the resources it needs to survive. These are not stories of dramatic interruption, but of a gradual fading, a dream slowly suffocated by empty coffers and shifting priorities. The scale of these ancient monuments was staggering, and they required an equally staggering investment. We're not talking about simple buildings. We're talking about projects that could consume a significant portion of a kingdom's entire wealth for generations. To understand why a pharaoh's pyramid or a king's colossal stupa was left half-built, we often need to follow the money, and that trail reveals the intricate and often fragile economic engines that powered these ancient societies. The Mingun Pahtodawgyi in Myanmar, which we explored earlier, is a textbook case of economic overreach. King Balbek's vision was so colossal that it essentially began to cannibalize the very economy it was meant to glorify. The constant demand for bricks, for labor, for timber, for food to feed the workers, it created a massive, unsustainable drain. The kingdom's wealth wasn't infinite. It was based on agricultural surplus, taxation, and control of trade routes. By dedicating such a huge portion of that finite wealth to a single, non-productive project, meaning it didn't directly generate more food, goods, or military power, the king was risking the overall stability of his realm. When he died, the court looked at the balance sheets and made a cold, pragmatic calculation. Continuing was a luxury they could no longer afford. The dream was sacrificed to keep the kingdom itself afloat. This pattern repeats itself across history. The great Gothic cathedrals of Europe, for instance, were often centuries-long projects that rose and fell with the economic fortunes of their cities. A war, a poor harvest, or the outbreak of plague could empty the donation coffers for a decade, leaving a half-built nave open to the skies until prosperity returned. But the story isn't always about a complete societal collapse. Sometimes it's simply about a change in what a society values. A project that seems utterly essential in one era can become a frivolous anachronism in the next. Take the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. Construction began in 1892 with a design that was ambitiously Gothic, a style that was already centuries out of date. Its builders were attempting to create a medieval-scale monument in the modern industrial age. work progressed in fits and starts throughout the 20th century, halted by 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and constant fundraising shortfalls. The intended spire was never added, and the facade remains incomplete. Why? Because the immense capital and public will required to finish it gradually evaporated. The economic priorities of New Yorkers shifted towards skyscrapers, infrastructure, and modern art museums. The cathedral, while still a beloved landmark, transitioned from a must-complete religious imperative to a beautiful, ongoing project that may never be finished in the traditional sense. Its unfinished state is a direct reflection of our modern, pluralistic economy, where funding relies on a complex mix of private donations and historical preservation grants, rather than the decree of an all-powerful king or church. These economic pauses are like financial core samples for historians. An abandoned project funded by tax revenue, like many ancient Egyptian monuments, tells us about the strength of the centralized state and its ability to extract wealth from the population. A donor-driven project, like a medieval cathedral, reveals the piety and economic power of the merchant class and guilds who funded its construction. A project built by exploiting a specific resource, like the silver mines that funded Athens' building program in its golden age, shows a precarious economy vulnerable to the depletion of that single resource. When work stops, it often signals a crack in that specific financial model. By studying these frozen moments, we gain a profound understanding of what truly underpinned these civilizations, not just their religious beliefs or artistic genius, but their farms, their trade networks, their tax collectors, and their banks. It's a humbling reminder that even the most spiritual and artistic achievements are built upon the foundation of a healthy economy. And when that foundation crumbles, the dreams built upon it are often the first things to be left unfinished. But perhaps the most profound examples of this phenomenon are found not in grand conversions, but in quiet abandonment. Across India, particularly in the northern states, stand hundreds of Jain and Hindu temples whose construction was abruptly halted during the waves of Islamic expansion from the 12th century onward. The evidence is etched into the stone itself. At sites like the Sas Bahu temple complex in Madhya Pradesh, you can find pillars that are exquisitely carved on one side, depicting gods and goddesses in intricate detail, while the opposite side remains a rough, unfinished block. It's as if the sculptors simply put down their chisels in the middle of a stroke and never returned. These aren't ruins, they are frozen moments of interrupted devotion. They tell a silent story of a community that was forced to flee, or whose patronage and protection suddenly vanished, leaving their spiritual aspirations literally half-realized. This sudden stop preserved artistic styles and techniques at a very specific point in time, offering art historians a clear timeline of regional sculptural evolution that might otherwise have been lost if the temples had been completed and then later renovated or destroyed. This dynamic reveals a crucial truth about human civilization. Our grandest buildings are not just structures of wood and stone. They are physical manifestations of our deepest beliefs and identities. When those beliefs change, the fate of our architecture often changes with it. A shift in the spiritual winds can leave a half-built temple as a stranded artifact of a fading worldview, while a new faith might eagerly repurpose its shell, layering its own story onto the old one. This constant negotiation between the old and the new, between different conceptions of the divine, is literally built into our landscapes. These sites show us that culture is not a monolith, but a river, constantly shifting its course and leaving behind oxbow lakes of abandoned projects that tell us where the flow once ran strong. They remind us that the stones we carve are not just for our own time, but become pages in a much longer story, written and rewritten by the generations that follow. What makes an unfinished monument so extraordinarily valuable to researchers is that it captures a moment of action, preserving the very process of creation itself. A completed building is a final product, its construction secrets often hidden beneath layers of plaster, paint, and subsequent modifications. But a project halted mid-construction is like a workshop suddenly abandoned, the tools left exactly where they were dropped, offering a pristine, uncensored view into the technological mind of a lost culture. These sites act as direct portals, allowing us to watch ancient engineers and laborers at work, revealing solutions to problems we never even knew they had to solve. Consider the unfinished obelisk in Aswan once more. While its scale is staggering, its true gift is the incredible detail it provides about Egyptian stone working. We don't have to theorize about how they extracted a 1,000-ton piece of granite. The evidence is right there. The channels carved around the obelisk are not smooth, machined grooves. They are rough, pockmarked trenches, and within them we can see the distinct, rounded scars left by the pounders. We know from fragments found at the site that these were fist-sized balls of dolerite, a stone even harder than granite. Teams of workers would have stood in those trenches, rhythmically pounding the bedrock with these simple yet effective tools, perhaps to the beat of a drum to maintain a steady rhythm. We can see where they carved out sockets for wooden wedges, which would have been soaked with water to expand and create the final fracture to separate the obelisk from the earth. This isn't a hypothetical reconstruction. It's a frozen manual of ancient engineering, showing us the exact sequence of operations from start to the moment it was abandoned. This principle applies across the globe and through different eras. The great Gothic cathedrals of Europe, many of which took centuries to build and were often paused for decades due to war or plague, are also treasure troves of medieval technology. When construction resumed, new techniques might be employed, leaving behind a visible timeline of innovation in the stonework. In the unfinished parts of these cathedrals, we can see the precise sockets and corbels where massive wooden crane systems called great wheels were anchored to the wall. These were essentially giant hamster wheels, powered by laborers walking inside them to hoist multi-ton stones hundreds of feet into the air. The intricate patterns of scaffolding holes, the stonemason's cryptic alignment marks, and even the occasional misplaced block that was never corrected. All of these details are usually hidden forever in a finished building. But in an unfinished state, they are laid bare, allowing historians to reverse engineer the entire construction process with a degree of confidence that would be impossible otherwise. This technological snapshot extends beyond grand monuments to more humble, yet equally revealing sites. In the Americas, the unfinished aspects of Inca stonework show us how they fitted their famous polygonal blocks. We can see partially worked stones with their distinctive bosses knobs left on to serve as handles for maneuvering still intact, demonstrating that the final, perfectly smooth surface was the very last step in the process. In Chinese tomb complexes, unfinished chambers reveal the methods used to create elaborate ceiling vaults, showing the temporary earth ramps that were built up to allow workers to place the heavy stones, which were then buried and forgotten, leaving the hollow structure behind. Each of these frozen moments provides a crucial data point, helping us compile a global history of innovation. It allows us to move beyond marveling at what they built and begin to truly understand how they did it, appreciating the sheer ingenuity, patience, and skill that turned raw materials into the wonders that still captivate us today. This record is a testament to the practical genius of ordinary people, whose names are lost to history, but whose problem-solving legacy is permanently etched into the very stone they left behind. When we gaze upon the skeletal remains of an unfinished monument, we are not just looking at a failed construction site. We are being handed a unique diagnostic tool, a kind of sociological X-ray that allows us to peer straight into the heart of a lost society. A completed building tells us about a culture's final achievements, but an interrupted project reveals its priorities, its pressures, and its deepest anxieties in a way nothing else can. The very choice of what to build and what was deemed so urgent that it consumed a kingdom's resources is incredibly telling. Was it a massive defensive wall? This suggests a society living under the constant threat of invasion, one that valued security above all else. A sprawling religious complex points to a theocratic state where the favor of the gods was considered the ultimate priority, the key to ensuring good harvests and victory in battle. An enormous royal tomb, like the pyramids of Egypt, reveals a civilization obsessed with the afterlife and the eternal power of a divine ruler. The moment of abandonment itself is a critical piece of evidence. A project halted with apparent care, with tools stored and materials secured, might indicate an orderly withdrawal due to a planned relocation or a strategic decision. But a site where tools are literally scattered, where a meal was left half-eaten, or where a block was dropped mid-haul, speaks of a sudden, catastrophic interruption. This is where these fragments become our most vital clues for understanding collapses that written records, if they exist at all, often only hint at. Take the fascinating and still debated case of Cahokia, the great pre-Columbian city located in what is now Illinois. At its peak around 1100 AD, it was a thriving metropolis, the largest urban center north of Mexico, dominated by enormous earthen mounds. Then, quite mysteriously, the mound building and major construction stopped. The city went into a gradual decline and was eventually abandoned. Why? There are no invasion accounts to read, no chronicles of a king's death. The answer lies in the unfinished work and the environmental evidence. Archaeologists studying the site have found clues that point to a perfect storm of social and environmental pressures. There is evidence of severe flooding that would have devastated the agricultural fields that fed the massive population. They've also found signs of deforestation, as the growing city consumed wood for construction and fuel, potentially leading to soil erosion and further ecological strain. The abandonment of monumental projects suggests that the highly centralized political and religious authority that could command such labor was breaking down. The society's energy shifted from grand communal building to sheer survival, and eventually that wasn't enough. The unfinished mounds of Cahokia are not just piles of dirt. They are a silent testament to a societal collapse likely driven by a complex interplay of overpopulation, environmental degradation, and social unrest. By reading these clues, we can move beyond kings and battles to reconstruct the nuanced fabric of daily life. The organization of labor at a quarry tells us about social hierarchy and specialization. The types of tools left behind speak to their technological capabilities. The remains of worker settlements, like those near the Giza pyramids, provide insight into their diet, health, and social structure. An unfinished monument is a frozen moment in a society's life cycle. It captures its ambitions at their most grandiose, but also exposes its vulnerabilities at their most raw. This approach allows us to build a far richer, more human-centered understanding of history, one where we can see not just what a civilization built, but what it dreamed of building and what ultimately, heartbreakingly, stopped it in its tracks. Returning to the sun-baked quarries of Aswan, we find much more than just the famous unfinished obelisk. We step into a sprawling, open-air archive of ancient industry. The entire landscape here is a chaotic yet orderly testament to the pharaoh's relentless ambition, littered with the ghosts of projects both great and small. Partially extracted obelisks, some barely started as simple trenches in the rock, others almost fully freed from the bedrock, lie abandoned where they were born. This isn't a single failure, it's a multi-generational workshop frozen in time, offering us the most complete picture we have of how the ancient Egyptians wrestled stone from the earth on a monumental scale. The true magic of this place lies in the minute details preserved in the rose-red granite. Every surface tells a story. The most obvious features are the deep, narrow channels carved around the intended obelisk. But look closer and you'll see they are not smooth. They are pockmarked with thousands of small, rounded depressions, the direct physical evidence of the workers' relentless pounding. We know from fragments found nearby that they used ball-shaped hammers made of dolerite, a stone even harder than granite. Teams of men would have stood in these trenches, swinging these pounders in rhythm, perhaps to the beat of a drum, slowly, inexorably, eating away at the stone. It was a method of incredible patience and brute force, a technology that remained largely unchanged for centuries because it worked. Beyond the tool marks, this quarry is a treasure trove of social history. Archaeologists have deciphered ancient graffiti left by the work crews, inscriptions that often include the name of the team. These weren't anonymous slaves toiling under a whip, as outdated Hollywood tales would have us believe. They were organized, specialized labor units with names like the Strong Gang or the Vigorous Gang, taking pride in their work. We have records, administrative papyri found elsewhere, that detail the sophisticated logistics behind this operation. Workers were organized into shifts and provided with rations, bread, beer, fish, and vegetables in quantities that suggest this was a state-sponsored, highly structured endeavor, more akin to a national project than a punishment. The quarry itself reveals the remnants of their daily lives. Simple stone huts for shelter, areas for preparing food, and pathways worn smooth by countless feet moving stone and supplies. This microcosm at Aswan forces us to recalibrate our imagination. We often marvel at the finished obelisk standing proud in a temple court, and we attribute its creation solely to the divine will of a pharaoh. But here we see the breathtaking human machinery required to make that happen. It was an operation that required surveyors to align the stone, engineers to plan the extraction, foremen to manage the crews, cooks to feed the army of workers, and sailors to transport the final product down the Nile. The sheer scale of the organization speaks to a bureaucratic and administrative capability that was, in its own way, as impressive as the engineering. The unfinished obelisk itself, for all its grandeur, is ultimately a testament to a flaw in the stone, but the quarry that surrounds it is a testament to a flawless system of human endeavor, a system that could conceive of and nearly execute the impossible. It adds a profound layer of depth to our understanding, transforming these monuments from cold, abstract wonders into the products of real people, their sweat, their skill, their organization, and their stories, all forever etched into this sacred ground of industry. Beyond their practical stories of abandonment, these skeletal structures hold a deeper, more universal power. They become vessels for meaning, reflecting the core values and philosophical struggles of the cultures that created them, and those that later inherited them. An unfinished monument is never just a building site frozen in time. It is a blank canvas upon which we project our deepest questions about ambition, mortality, and our place in the cosmos. The symbolism we attach to these places is rarely monolithic. It shifts dramatically across different cultural and religious landscapes, offering a fascinating lens through which to view humanity's diverse relationship with the divine and the fleeting nature of earthly power. In many Eastern traditions, particularly within Buddhism, the unfinished state of a monument is not necessarily seen as a failure, but can be interpreted as a profound spiritual lesson. The concept of impermanence or anicca is a central tenet of Buddhist philosophy, the understanding that all conditioned things, no matter how grand or seemingly permanent, are in a constant state of flux and will eventually decay. A stupa that remains incomplete can serve as a powerful, tangible reminder of this very principle. It visually rejects the ego-driven desire for a perfect, finished, and eternal testament to one's piety or power. Instead, its rough, unresolved form encourages contemplation on the nature of process itself, on the journey rather than the destination, and on the humility of accepting that not all things are meant to be brought to a state of polished completion. It symbolizes a conscious release of attachment to worldly achievements, even those undertaken for religious merit. This stands in stark contrast to the common Western interpretation, which has been heavily shaped by Judeo-Christian narratives and Greco-Roman tragedies. Here, an unfinished cathedral or a half-built castle often carries the weight of a cautionary tale. It is a symbol of hubris, the tragic flaw of overweening pride that inevitably leads to a downfall. These sites are frequently viewed through a romantic, melancholic lens, as ruins that speak to the vanity of human wishes and the ultimate triumph of time over all our endeavors. They are reminders of the fall, of a paradise lost, and of the fragility of even the most magnificent dreams when faced with plague, war, or folly. Yet these interpretations are not set in stone. They are remarkably fluid, evolving to reflect the anxieties and values of each new generation that encounters them. The same unfinished pyramid that symbolized political instability to an ancient Egyptian might be seen by a 19th-century Romantic poet as a sublime representation of nature's power to reclaim human works, and by a modern environmentalist as a stark warning about resource depletion. We constantly re-mythologize these sites. In the 20th century, the rapid rise and fall of brutalist architectural projects led many to see their decaying, unfinished concrete shells as critiques of failed utopian ideologies and the dehumanizing aspects of modernism. Today, we might look at an abandoned shopping mall and see a symbol of late-stage capitalism's excesses and vulnerabilities. This evolving dialogue is what keeps these places alive in our collective imagination. They are not static relics, they are active participants in a cultural conversation, always ready to absorb new meanings and provide new lessons relevant to the present moment. This chameleon-like quality, this ability to be both ancient and endlessly contemporary, is a key reason why a pile of stones can captivate us just as much as a gleaming, finished skyscraper. They hold up a mirror, asking us not only what the builders were thinking, but what we see in ourselves when we stand before their unfinished dreams. This cycle of grand ambition meeting an immovable reality is not confined to the dusty pages of history books. It's a drama that continues to play out in our modern world, on a scale that rivals even the most audacious ancient projects. Look no further than the skyline of Pyongyang, North Korea, dominated by the haunting, pyramid-like silhouette of the Ryugyong Hotel. Conceived in the 1980s as a statement of national prestige, it was designed to be the tallest hotel in the world, a 105-story titan of glass and concrete, meant to showcase the DPRK's power to the world during the Seoul Olympics. But the project quickly became a victim of the very system it was meant to glorify. Economic collapse, the fall of the Soviet Union, which had been a key benefactor, and crippling energy shortages brought construction to a grinding halt for over a decade and a half. For years, it stood as a hollow, windowless concrete shell, a stark and unavoidable symbol of the nation's economic isolation and failed ambitions, so embarrassing that it was famously airbrushed out of official state photographs. Its recent and still only partial completion with a glistening glass exterior does little to erase its original story. It simply adds a new, complex layer of attempted image rehabilitation over a core of profound struggle. The Ryugyong Hotel is a modern ziggorat, a testament to how political ideology and national pride can drive a project just as powerfully as any pharaoh's divine mandate, and how that same ideology can lead to its spectacular stalling. On a different continent, but born from a similar vein of overreach, are the ghostly suburbs of Spain. In the years leading up to the global financial crisis of 2008, the Spanish economy was booming on a surge of construction and easy credit. Developers embarked on wildly ambitious projects, envisioning vast housing complexes, airports, and entire cities to be built in the desert, anticipating endless demand. Then the bubble burst, the money vanished almost overnight. What remains are surreal landscapes of half-finished apartment blocks, skeletal structures of rebar rusting under the sun, and empty streets laid out before homes that were never completed. These are not ruins in the traditional sense. They are sites of very recent, very sudden interruption. They tell a story not of invasion or natural disaster, but of economic contagion, of a globalized financial system that could create and destroy dreams with the click of a button. These abandoned developments are the Mingun Pahtodawgyi of the modern era, monuments to an economic fervor that believed the good times would never end, and a humbling reminder of what happens when that belief collides with reality. What makes these modern parallels so incredibly valuable is that they provide a living, breathing context for the ancient sites we've been exploring. We have newspapers, financial records, and interviews with the architects and developers that explain exactly why the Spanish housing projects failed. We have political analysts who can deconstruct the motivations behind the Ryugyong Hotel. This detailed modern understanding allows us to work backwards, to use these clear, well-documented cases as a model for interpreting the more fragmentary evidence from the ancient world. When we see an abandoned obelisk with a crack in it, we can now also ask, was there also an economic component? Was the state overextended? Were resources suddenly needed elsewhere? When we study the unfinished Zigorate of Jore-Kurigalzu, we can think of the Ryugyong Hotel and understand that a project can be halted by a geopolitical shift far beyond its borders. This connection creates a powerful bridge across time, reminding us that the drivers of human ambition, pride, faith, the desire for legacy, and the forces that thwarted economics, politics, resource scarcity are universal constants. The materials change from stone to concrete, the tools from dolerite pounders to cranes, but the fundamental human story of reaching for the sky and sometimes falling short remains forever the same. These modern ruins teach us to be humble archaeologists of our own time, to look at our own half-built dreams and understand that we are simply the latest chapter in a very, very old story. So how do archaeologists and historians move beyond speculation to build these precise timelines, transforming a pile of abandoned stones into a coherent historical narrative? The process is a meticulous form of detective work, a multidisciplinary puzzle where each clue, no matter how small, can help pinpoint the exact moment the chisels fell silent. It's not reliant on any single magical technology, but rather on the clever correlation of multiple scientific and analytical techniques, each one cross-referenced against the others to build an irrefutable case. This is the rigorous science that separates established fact from romantic folklore, allowing us to replace vague phrases like "a long time ago" with startlingly specific dates and even seasons. One of the most revolutionary tools in this arsenal is radiocarbon dating. This technique works on a simple, elegant principle. all living things absorb carbon from the atmosphere, including a radioactive isotope called carbon-14. When an organism dies, it stops absorbing carbon, and the existing carbon-14 begins to decay at a very predictable rate. By measuring how much is left in an organic sample, scientists can calculate how long ago that organism died. For an archaeologist at an unfinished monument, this is invaluable. A piece of charcoal left in a fire pit used by the workers to cook their meals, the remains of a wooden wedge used to split stone that shattered and was abandoned, or even the seeds from the last meal a laborer ate on site. All of these can be subjected to radiocarbon dating. The result provides a very clear window of time for when that material was last alive, effectively giving a last used by date for that area of the construction site. It's like finding a dated receipt at a crime scene. It doesn't tell you the whole story, but it firmly anchors one specific moment in time. But carbon dating is just the beginning. Archaeologists also rely heavily on stratigraphy, the study of layers of soil and debris. The fundamental rule is simple: the deeper something is buried, the older it is. At a site that was abandoned suddenly, the stratigraphic layers act like a timeline of the final days. A layer containing wood shavings, stone chips, and tool fragments clearly represents the active construction phase. Above that, there might be a layer of wind-blown dust or silt from a season of neglect. Then, perhaps, a layer of ash from a catastrophic fire that swept through the area, or a layer of volcanic pumice that buried the site, as at Akrotiri. By carefully excavating and documenting each of these microscopic layers, experts can reconstruct the sequence of events that led to the abandonment. It's a form of geological storytelling, reading the history of the site directly from the earth itself. The stones themselves hold even more clues through tool mark analysis. The way a surface is cut or shaped is as distinctive as a signature. The type of chisel used by an Egyptian stoneworker leaves a very different mark than one used by a Roman or a medieval European mason. By studying the precise patterns, the width of the grooves, and the angle of the strikes, specialists can not only identify the tools used but often determine the level of skill of the worker and even the specific quarry or workshop tradition they came from. This allows historians to track the movement of skilled labor and understand the chain of technological knowledge. If a series of blocks show partially finished work with one type of tool mark and then are abandoned, it can indicate that a particular group of workers left and were never replaced, perhaps because they were conscripted into an army or succumbed to an epidemic. Perhaps one of the most subtle and fascinating techniques is environmental analysis, such as the study of pollen or phytoliths, microscopic silica structures from plants. When ancient workers mixed mortar, they would often do so on the ground, and the mixture would trap tiny, durable pollen grains from the surrounding environment. By analyzing the pollen species found in the mortar from the very last batch used on an unfinished wall, scientists can determine what plants were in bloom at the time. This can reveal the exact season when the work stopped. Was it spring with pollen from fruit trees, or late summer with grains from harvested cereals? This incredible level of detail can help answer whether a project was halted by a seasonal event like annual flooding or a more permanent catastrophe. Finally, all of this scientific data is woven together with the thread of historical records where they exist. An inscription mentioning a pharaoh's death, a clay tablet from a neighboring kingdom describing an invasion, or a priest's record of a famine. These textual clues provide the context that turns a collection of dates and layers into a full, rich story. It is this powerful synthesis of science and history that allows us to look at a cracked obelisk or a half-laid foundation and say with growing confidence, "This is what happened here." Even with the most advanced scientific tools at our disposal, the past refuses to give up all its secrets. For every fact we can carbon date or stratigraphically sequence, there remains a tantalizing gap, a space where evidence runs out and interpretation must begin. This is where the true detective work of history unfolds, in the realm of informed speculation, where experts weave together scattered clues to propose plausible, and sometimes competing, narratives for why these monumental dreams were so abruptly abandoned. These theories are not wild guesses. They are careful, reasoned hypotheses that consider the full, complex tapestry of human experience: political, spiritual, environmental, and technological. They remind us that history is rarely a story with a single, simple cause, but a web of interconnected events and motivations. Take the case of Pharaoh Neferefer's pyramid. The straightforward explanation is the most logical. A young ruler died unexpectedly, and his successor, faced with the immense cost and effort, chose to adapt the existing structure rather than see it through to completion. This is a practical, political decision we can easily understand. But what if there's more to the story? Some Egyptologists point to the broader context of the 5th dynasty, a period that saw a gradual shift of power and wealth away from the pharaoh and toward the priesthood of the sun god Ra and the country's regional administrators. Could Neferefer's sudden death have been the catalyst for a more significant power struggle, a quiet coup or a revolt that made finishing his personal monument a low priority for the new regime? Alternatively, the ancient Egyptian world was deeply intertwined with omens and divine will. Was the pharaoh's short reign and the failure of his eternal home interpreted by the court as a sign of disfavor from the gods? A crack in the stone during construction, an eclipse, or a poor flood of the Nile could have been seen as a potent omen, making the site itself spiritually contaminated and unfit for completion. These layers of possibility enrich the story, moving it from a simple tragedy to a potential window into the religious and political tensions simmering beneath the surface of the Old Kingdom. The mysteries of Baalbek's megaliths inspire an even broader range of theories, often reflecting the passions and expertise of those who study them. Mainstream archaeologists and engineers, focusing on practicality, lean toward the immense logistical challenge as the primary culprit. Moving a 1,000-ton block is not just difficult, it is a borderline suicidal endeavor that would have required the entire region's labor force and resources for a single task. A calculating Roman foreman might have simply decided the return on investment wasn't worth the staggering risk of failure or the certain drain on the treasury, especially if legionnaires were needed elsewhere to secure the empire's fractious borders. The discovery of a critical flaw in the limestone, much like the crack in the Aswan obelisk, could have provided a convenient technical excuse to abandon the most ambitious part of the project. Yet, the sheer audacity of the undertaking has fueled other, more expansive lines of inquiry. The temple complex at Balbeck was built upon a much older, pre-Roman foundation, a massive stone platform that includes the gigantic trilithon blocks. This has led to persistent speculation about a potential lost chapter in the site's history. Could an earlier, unknown civilization with different technologies or a unique social organization, one capable of mobilizing labor on an almost unimaginable scale, have begun the work? Proponents of this view argue that the Romans, master adapters who often built upon conquered people's sacred sites, might have simply inherited and repurposed an existing, mind-boggling foundation, perhaps even abandoning the largest block because its scale was beyond their own engineering comfort zone. Other theorists propose a more symbolic reason. Perhaps the largest stones were never intended to be moved at all. Their purpose might have been to remain forever in the quarry, serving as a permanent or inspiring testament to the power of the gods and the king who dared to attempt their extraction, a monument to the attempt itself rather than to a finished product. This idea transforms the site from a construction failure into a profound philosophical statement. This vibrant ecosystem of theories, from the rigorously archaeological to the tantalizingly speculative, is not a weakness in our understanding. It is the lifeblood of historical inquiry. It keeps the conversation alive and dynamic, encouraging each new generation to look at the old stones with fresh eyes and new technologies. It forces us to question our assumptions and consider the past as a place as complex and multifaceted as our own present. These debates ensure that these unfinished monuments are never truly dead or static. They remain active puzzles, constantly challenging us to fill in the blanks with our best-informed guesses, ensuring their mysteries continue to captivate and inspire long after the last stone was laid. These silent, skeletal structures have never been content to simply remain in the past. They possess a unique power to leap across centuries and ignite the creative spark in poets, painters, and filmmakers. They become more than historical artifacts. They transform into universal symbols, their incomplete forms serving as a blank canvas upon which each generation projects its own anxieties, aspirations, and philosophical musings. Perhaps the most famous example is Percy Bysshe Shelley's iconic sonnet, Ozymandias. The poem doesn't describe a bustling, powerful empire, but its opposite, the shattered, half-sunken visage of a forgotten king, a colossal wreck alone in the lone and level sands. Shelley never saw an actual unfinished monument, but he perfectly captured their essence, the stark contrast between the king's boastful inscription, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair," and the reality of utter desolation. The poem uses this image to deliver a timeless lesson on the folly of hubris and the inevitable decay of all temporal power, a message that resonates as strongly today as it did in 1818. This artistic attraction is rooted in the potent duality these sites represent. They are simultaneously majestic and pathetic, embodying both the pinnacle of human ambition and its ultimate failure. This inherent tension is catnip for creators. The romantic painters of the 18th and 19th centuries, like J.M.W. Turner or Caspar David Friedrich, were obsessed with ruins, both finished and unfinished. They didn't see them as signs of decay, but as sources of the sublime, a mix of awe, terror, and beautiful melancholy evoked by something grand and terrifyingly powerful. Their paintings often feature overgrown Gothic arches or crumbling classical temples, not as accurate historical records, but as mood pieces designed to stir the soul and remind viewers of nature's ultimate victory over human endeavor. In modern cinema, this tradition continues with profound effect. Andrei Tarkovsky's masterpiece, Stalker, uses the decaying infrastructure of a Soviet-era industrial zone, a stand-in for an unfinished, abandoned modern world, to create a haunting landscape for a deeply philosophical journey. The setting is not a backdrop, it is a central character. Its rusted, waterlogged, and dangerously stagnant environment reflecting the inner states of the characters and the spiritual desolation of the society they come from. It's a powerful commentary on the failed utopian dreams of the 20th century, where the monuments to progress became tombs for ideology. Similarly, films like Blade Runner 2049 feature massive, unfinished structures as a core part of their dystopian landscapes, suggesting a world that has lost the ability or the will to complete its own dreams. This artistic engagement does more than just produce great works. It actively preserves the legacy of these places in our collective consciousness. Long after the name of a pharaoh or the specific reason for a project's abandonment has faded from popular memory, the cultural echo remains. The image of the broken statue, the overgrown archway, or the stranded block of stone becomes a shorthand for universal themes. This process ensures that these sites are never truly lost. They are continuously rediscovered and reimagined, their stories adapted to warn new generations about the dangers of arrogance, to inspire reflections on the nature of time, or to simply provide a beautiful, melancholy space for contemplation. By weaving these fragments into the fabric of our art, we grant them a kind of immortality they were never originally intended to have, ensuring that their silent questions continue to be heard long into the future. Yet for all their resilience in surviving centuries of abandonment, these unfinished monuments are paradoxically some of the most fragile and vulnerable time capsules we have inherited from the ancient world. Unlike a completed pyramid with its smooth, protective casing stones or a finished temple with its drained foundations and sturdy roofs, these fragments are often raw, exposed, and structurally incomplete. They are, in essence, patients in a permanent state of triage, requiring constant vigilance and care to ensure they don't simply crumble back into the earth from which they were carved. Their very incompleteness, which makes them so archaeologically valuable, is also their greatest weakness, leaving them defenseless against a modern onslaught of environmental and human threats. Consider the primary enemy, erosion. A completed ancient structure often had sophisticated systems to handle water runoff, but an unfinished monument is all open wounds. At the unfinished obelisk in Aswan, the very tool marks and channels that tell us so much about Egyptian technology are also perfect conduits for water. During a rare desert rain, water collects in these grooves, seeps into microscopic cracks, and then expands under the baking sun or in a rare freeze, slowly but surely prizing the granite apart grain by grain. At the Mingun Pahtodawgyi in Myanmar, the massive earthquake cracks are not static scars. They widen imperceptibly each year with seasonal rains and tremors, threatening to destabilize the entire brick mass. In Mesoamerica, the jungle is a relentless force, its roots and vines prying apart the unmortared stones of unfinished Mayan platforms, slowly digesting the structures back into the landscape. This isn't a rapid destruction, but a silent, inexorable process that, without intervention, will eventually erase these delicate snapshots of the past. Beyond the elements, the very human curiosity that drives us to learn from these sites also poses a significant danger. Uncontrolled tourism, while a source of vital revenue, can be devastating. The simple act of thousands of hands touching a surface like the carved channels of the Aswan obelisk wears it down over decades, a phenomenon called wear by affection. The oils from human skin degrade stone, and the pressure of countless feet compact the earth around foundations, destabilizing entire structures. Furthermore, the remote locations of many sites make them tantalizing targets for looters. An unfinished statue or a partially carved block might not have the black market value of a golden mask, but to a local subsistence looter, even a small artifact can represent a month's wages. These thefts are not just a loss of an object, they are a destruction of context, ripping a word from the sentence of history and making the remaining clues harder to read. This is where global organizations like UNESCO step in, designating these places as World Heritage Sites to raise their profile and marshal international resources for their protection. Though work is painstaking and unglamorous, it isn't about reconstruction that would destroy their historical value, but about meticulous stabilization. Engineers might install nearly invisible drainage systems to divert water away from critical areas. Conservators use specialized grouts to fill cracks and prevent further water ingress, always with materials that can be reversed by future experts with better technologies. They build discreet shelters to protect vulnerable surfaces from sun and rain, and install monitoring equipment to track the slightest movements in the structure. However, this expertise is expensive and in short supply, and the list of endangered sites is long. The ongoing political instability in regions like the Middle East adds another layer of peril, where protecting cultural heritage often falls tragically low on the list of priorities amidst human suffering. This creates an almost impossible balancing act. How do we allow the public to experience and be inspired by these places without loving them to death? The solution often lies in clever, sensitive management. At some sites, access is limited to guided walkways that protect the fragile ground from erosion. Advanced digital techniques like high-resolution 3D scanning and virtual reality tours are becoming invaluable tools, creating perfect digital twins of the monuments that can be explored online by anyone in the world, reducing the physical pressure on the originals. The choice to preserve these sites is a conscious decision to value knowledge and our shared human story over convenience or short-term gain. It is a promise we make to the past and to the future, a commitment to safeguarding these fragile, unfinished sentences so that the conversations they started thousands of years ago are never forced to end. Perhaps the most profound lesson these abandoned sites offer is a radical sense of humility, a necessary counterbalance to our modern narrative of endless progress and control. When we walk through a polished, restored ruin like the Roman Forum or the Parthenon, it's easy to feel a sense of distance, to see those civilizations as invincible titans whose decline was an anomaly. But an unfinished monument strips away that final, triumphant facade. It shows us the sweat, the uncertainty, and the sheer gamble inherent in every great human endeavor. The cracked obelisk, the stranded megalith, the half-built stupa, they don't whisper of eternal glory. They speak in the much more relatable language of ambition meeting its limit. They force us to confront the uncomfortable truth that every civilization, no matter how brilliant or powerful, operates within a fragile web of stability that can be torn by a poor harvest, a new disease, a political squabble, or a hidden flaw in a block of stone. This isn't a lesson in pessimism, it's a lesson in realism. It encourages us to look at our own soaring skyscrapers, our massive infrastructure projects, and our plans for Martian colonies not with unchecked arrogance, but with a sober appreciation for the complex and often precarious systems that allow them to exist. This perspective invites a more honest and holistic reading of history itself. We often learn about the past through its greatest successes, the laws of Hammurabi, the philosophy of Plato, the engineering of the aqueducts. These finished products are vital, but they can create a distorted, top-down view of history, focusing almost exclusively on the elites, the victors, and the completed masterpieces. Unfinished monuments democratize this narrative. They pull the curtain back to reveal the immense, often anonymous, human effort required to make those successes possible. The quarries of Aswan aren't about Pharaoh alone. They are about the organized gangs of workers, the foremen, the cooks, and the engineers. The story of a cathedral halted by the Black Death is as much about the decimated community of stonemasons and their families as it is about the archbishop who commissioned it. These sites give a voice and a presence to the countless ordinary people who are the true foundation of any civilization, reminding us that history is built not just by kings and conquerors, but by the collective labor, skill, and ultimately, the vulnerabilities of entire societies. Ultimately, these fragments serve as a timeless mirror, reflecting back at us the dual nature of the human spirit. In their scale, we see our boundless capacity for vision, creativity, and faith, our deep-seated need to create meaning, to reach for the divine, and to leave a mark that outlasts our fleeting lives. We see this in the pharaoh's desire for eternal life, the king's wish for divine favor, and the city's collective effort to build a symbol of its identity. Yet, in their fractured, interrupted state, we see an equally powerful truth: our inherent fragility. We are vulnerable to the tectonic shifts of the earth, to the unpredictable currents of economics, to the conflicts that arise from our own divisions, and to the simple, inescapable reality of our own mortality. This combination is what makes these places so endlessly compelling. They don't offer a simple, heroic story or a tragic elegy. They offer a complex, deeply human portrait that encompasses both our greatness and our smallness. They teach us that the drive to build and the reality of decay are two sides of the same coin, and that true wisdom lies in understanding both our power and our limits. This is the enduring gift of these silent sentinels from the past, not a warning against dreaming, but an invitation to dream with both ambition and grace, building our future with a mindful respect for the lessons etched in the stone of those who came before us. Perhaps you're feeling that pull, that desire to move beyond the screen and stand in the very places we've been exploring, to feel the sun-baked stone and sense the echoes of the past for yourself. The good news is that you absolutely can, and embarking on your own journey to connect with these unfinished monuments is an incredibly rewarding pursuit, whether you're planning a major international trip or an afternoon of digital exploration from your living room. For those with the opportunity to travel, a little preparation transforms a simple visit into a profound experience. Before you go, dive into the specific history of your chosen site. Understanding that the unfinished obelisk is linked to Pharaoh Hatshepsut, or that the Mingun Pahtodawgyi was halted by a prophecy, will make standing before them infinitely more meaningful. This isn't just about memorizing dates, it's about building a narrative in your mind that will come alive when you're finally there. Once you've done your homework, the next crucial step is to understand the local context and guidelines. These are not just tourist attractions, they are often active archaeological sites, sacred spaces, or fragile relics in need of protection. A quick check of the official tourism websites for countries like Egypt, Lebanon, or Myanmar will provide essential information on visiting hours, ticket purchases, and any specific rules, such as dress codes for religious sites or restrictions on touching the monuments. This respectful approach ensures your safety, protects the sites for future generations, and often leads to a more welcoming experience with local caretakers. To truly unlock the layers of history, seriously consider hiring a local guide, even if just for a few hours. A knowledgeable guide can point out details you'd certainly miss on your own: the faint remnants of worker graffiti at Aswan, the specific type of stone used at Balbeck, or the story behind a crack caused by an earthquake at Mingun. They provide the color commentary to the textbook you've created in your head, connecting the grand sweep of history to the very ground beneath your feet. For many, international travel to these remote locations simply isn't feasible, but that shouldn't bar you from deep exploration. We live in a golden age of digital access to the world's cultural heritage. Institutions like UNESCO and countless museums offer stunning high-resolution virtual tours of many key sites. You can often navigate around the unfinished obelisk or through the temple complex at Balbeck with a level of detail that lets you zoom in on tool marks and architectural features you might not even be able to see in person. To go even deeper, delve into the world of academic resources. Platforms like Google Scholar or JSTOR provide access to papers and reports from the archaeologists actually working at these digs. Reading a geologist's analysis of the crack in the Aswan granite or an art historian's study of the carvings at an abandoned temple allows you to engage with the cutting edge of discovery, transforming you from a passive observer into an active learner. The beauty of this pursuit is that it meets you wherever you are. Your journey might begin with a captivating documentary that sparks a curiosity about Balbek's megaliths. That curiosity could lead you down a rabbit hole of academic articles, which might inspire you to seek out a local museum with Roman artifacts to better understand their engineering principles. Perhaps you'll find yourself connecting with online forums of fellow enthusiasts, sharing theories and resources. Whether you're a casual traveler looking to add depth to your next vacation or an aspiring historian considering a university application, these fragments of the past offer endless avenues for engagement. They invite you to become a detective, to look closely, to question, and to connect your own story to the vast, unfinished human story that is written across the globe in stone and ambition. This active, hands-on connection, whether physical or intellectual, is what transforms history from a dry subject in a book into a living, breathing dialogue across time. What gives these silent, half-formed giants such a powerful hold on our imagination, centuries or even millennia after their creators vanished? It's because they are not closed books with a definitive ending, but open invitations. An unfinished monument is the ultimate historical puzzle, a story with crucial pages torn out, and this very incompleteness beckons us to step into the role of detective. We are not passive observers of a finished past. We become active participants in its reconstruction, piecing together clues from tool marks, geological strata, and fragmented records to spin theories about what might have been. This intellectual engagement is deeply satisfying, a form of time travel where our own curiosity becomes the vehicle. It transforms history from a static list of facts into a living, breathing mystery that we are personally invested in solving, connecting us to the past in a uniquely intimate way. Beyond the thrill of the puzzle, these sites resonate on a profound emotional level because they embody a universal human tension we all recognize: the dramatic clash between our boundless ambition and the uncontrollable forces that so often thwart it. We look at the unfinished obelisk and see our own grand plans, the business we started, the novel we began, the dream we nurtured. And we recognize that moment when a hidden crack appears, when resources dry up, or when circumstances beyond our control bring everything to a halt. These stones are powerful, silent symbols of our own struggles, making the ambitions and failures of ancient pharaohs and kings feel strikingly relatable. They are a humbling reminder that this dance of creation and interruption is not a modern condition, but a fundamental part of the human experience across all ages and cultures. This unique combination ensures their stories are never truly finished. A completed monument like the Great Pyramid tells a single, magnificent but largely fixed story. An unfinished one, however, is a canvas onto which every generation can project its own values, fears, and questions. The Romantic poets saw them as sublime symbols of nature's power over man. The Industrial Age might have viewed them as cautionary tales about overreach. Today, we might see them as stark warnings about ecological overconsumption or the fragility of complex societies. Their meaning is perpetually fluid, always ready to be reinterpreted through the lens of the present. This endless conversation, this ability to remain perpetually relevant, is what cements their place in our cultural consciousness. They never become stale artifacts because they are always waiting for us to ask a new question and discover a new layer of meaning. Ultimately, these fragments are far more than just intriguing ruins or failed construction projects. They are echoes. When we stand before them, we are not just looking at stone, we are listening for the whispers of lost worlds, the clang of a dolerite pounder in an Aswan quarry, the shouted orders of a foreman at Balbeck, the chants of priests at a half-built ziggorat, the silent hopes of a king who dreamed of eternity. They connect us to the humanity of people separated from us by thousands of years, reminding us that they too loved, planned, struggled, and dared to reach for the impossible. In their incompleteness, they offer us the most honest and poignant portrait of history itself, not as a parade of inevitable successes, but as a beautiful, fragile, and ongoing process of trying, failing, and dreaming again. They are a gift from the past that reminds us of our own place in this long, unbroken chain of human aspiration. Throughout this exploration, we have journeyed across continents and millennia, standing in the shadows of dreams frozen in stone. We have seen how these unfinished monuments are far more than abandoned construction sites. They are unique, unparalleled windows into the hearts and minds of lost civilizations. They capture a moment of pure ambition, preserving not just the grand vision of a pharaoh or a king, but the very fingerprints of the engineers and laborers who toiled to make it real. From the cracked obelisk in the Aswan quarry, which reveals the intimate details of Egyptian stoneworking, to the staggering megaliths of Balbeck that challenge our understanding of Roman engineering, these fragments tell a story that finished monuments often conceal. They show us the precise chisel stroke that was never completed, the foundation that was never built upon, the technological innovation that was suddenly halted. In their raw, interrupted state, they offer a snapshot of a society's priorities, its resources, and its vulnerabilities at a specific, dramatic point in time. These silent sentinels teach us profound and universal lessons about the human condition. They speak to the incredible resilience of the human spirit, our relentless drive to create, to build, to reach for the divine, and to leave a mark that echoes through the ages. The sheer scale of these attempts to erect a 1,000-ton block of stone or to construct the largest stupa on Earth is a breathtaking testament to what we can achieve when we pool our knowledge, our labor, and our faith. Yet, simultaneously, they are humbling reminders of our limits. They illustrate the hubris that can accompany great power and the fleeting nature of that power when confronted with the immutable forces of nature, the unpredictability of economics, the brutality of conflict, or the simple reality of mortality. A crack in the granite, a shift in the political wind, a king's sudden death, each could bring the most magnificent vision to a permanent standstill. This duality is what makes these sites so compelling. They embody both our greatest strengths and our most human weaknesses. This journey reminds us that history is not a simple narrative of progress and success, a clean line from one completed triumph to the next. It is a complex, messy, and deeply human story that is just as much about what was attempted and interrupted as it is about what was finished. The abandoned projects, the stalled dreams, the sudden halts, these are not footnotes to history. They are central chapters that reveal the dynamic pressures, the unforeseen obstacles, and the difficult choices that every civilization must face. They force us to look beyond the polished facades of completed palaces and temples to see the struggle, the uncertainty, and the ambition that defined an era. In doing so, they provide a more honest, more complete, and ultimately more relatable portrait of our past. As you reflect on these mysteries, I invite you to consider a parallel in our own time. Look around at the ambitious projects of our modern world, the soaring skyscrapers, the vast infrastructure, the plans for new frontiers. Now consider which of our own endeavors might be left unfinished. What monuments of our age will stand as half-built testaments to our ambitions and our interruptions? What will future generations learn about us from the projects we started but could not complete? Will they see the cracks in our systems, the shifts in our priorities, or the forces beyond our control that brought our dreams to a halt? This perspective is not meant to discourage ambition, but to enrich it with humility and foresight, to encourage us to build with both vision and an awareness of our place in the long arc of history. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the unknown passages of our past. We have unraveled the stories hidden in stone and speculated on the worlds that might have been. If these glimpses into history's greatest enigmas have captivated your curiosity, please subscribe to the channel for more journeys to the edges of our understanding. There are always more mysteries waiting to be uncovered.